Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? We retell those moments honest, every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The first thing I noticed was how easily my daughter-in-law said it. 4 ribeyes, medium rare, the roasted bone marrow, the truffle fries, and a bottle of the Camus. Brooke did not look at me when she spoke. She flicked her eyes at the waiter, then added almost as an afterthought, and no entree for her. Just water. Her manicure caught the chandelier light as she lifted her wine glass, like she had just checked something off a list. Across the table, the waiter's pen paused for half a second. It was the kind of pause only a person who has worked in food service notices. His gaze flicked to me, searching for a correction that did not come. When I did not say a word, he swallowed, nodded once, and wrote it down. Beside me, my son sat very straight in his tailored navy suit. Dan had his father's shoulders now and a jawline sharpened by the gym memberships and good health insurance. He did not look at me either. His eyes stayed on the white tablecloth, on the heavy silverware, on anything that was not my face. He leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne, woody and expensive, the kind they keep locked in glass at department stores. His voice slid under the hum of the dining room. "Mom," he murmured, "you should know your place." The words were soft, almost gentle. That made them worse. A flush crept up the back of his neck. He was embarrassed, but not for me. I set my hands in my lap so he would not see them stiffen. The linen napkin felt too smooth under my fingertips. I turned my head toward him just enough to answer. "Of course," I said. The tone I used was the one I had built over decades, the one I wore to work and to parent-teacher conferences and to grocery store counters when the card machine hesitated. Calm, neutral, acceptable. The waiter returned with a tall glass of water packed with ice. He set it carefully in front of me. Condensation gathered instantly on the crystal, a ring already forming on the white linen. He opened his mouth as if to say something and then shut it and stepped away. I wrapped my fingers around the cold glass. The chill bit into the joints of my hand. In the curved surface, I saw my own face stretched and warped by the water and the light. I had never looked quite so small. Across the room near the bar, Marco stood with a clipboard against his chest, talking to a bartender. Even from here, I could tell he had seen the little scene at our table. His eyes found mine dark and quick. Concern flickered there, sharp and bright, before he schooled his expression and turned back to his staff. He knew me well enough to read the set of my shoulders. I knew him well enough to recognize he was waiting to see what I would do. My son's words hung in the air between us, heavier than the smell of grilled meat and butter. My place. 3 days earlier, the phone had rung as if it also knew about places and timing. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the thin kind of Chicago sunlight that never quite committed to warmth, filtering through my kitchen window. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hiss of the old radiator and the steady drip from the faucet I kept meaning to fix. I had just rinsed flour from my hands, the last of a batch of cheap cookie dough I was baking for the neighbors' kids. The countertops were chipped along the edges, laminate, curling up in one corner where the glue had long given up. The coffee maker on the far end of the counter had been with me for 15 years. It still groaned every morning like it resented waking up. When the phone rang, I glanced at the clock above the stove. 3:22. On a Tuesday, Dan should have been at the country club in Oak Park with Robert Harrington walking perfect greens and talking about quarterly numbers. He never called on Tuesdays. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up. "Hey, Mom." His voice had that brightness he puts on for clients and Christmas photos. Under it, something else pressed against the line, something I could not quite name. "Hi, honey," I said. "Everything all right?" Yeah, everything's fine." He cleared his throat. "I was thinking we should have dinner. Just family. Me, Brooke, my parents-in-law, you. It's been a while." I looked at the small stack of bills held to the fridge by a magnet shaped like a lemon. Behind them, a drawing from Lily, all purple hearts and crooked houses. Flour dusted the front of my sweatshirt. My sneakers were damp from the snow I had dragged in earlier. "Dinner sounds nice," I said. "Where?" "There's this place downtown. Ember and Oak, on Wabash near the river." I could hear the smile in his voice. "It's kind of a big deal. I thought you'd like it." "Saturday at 7 work." I knew Ember and Oak. I knew the way the wood smoke clung to the brick walls, how the chandelier light pooled on polished floors, how the sound of a busy Saturday night layered over itself until it felt like music. I knew which tables the servers fought for, which ones the regulars requested by number. Of course, Dan did not know that I knew any of that. Ember and Oak, I repeated as if tasting the name for the first time. I think I've heard of it. It's one of the best in the city, he said a little proudly. I'll make the reservation. Just be there a few minutes early so we don't keep them waiting. All right, I told him. I'll be there. After we hung up, I let the phone rest in my palm. It was still warm against my skin. Outside the window across the narrow alley, someone's laundry flapped stiffly in the wind. A siren wailed far off, then faded. The kitchen smelled like sugar and cheap vanilla extract. I thought of the years when dinner meant whatever I could stretch from a paycheck that never seemed enough. The night shifts at the packing plant, the chemical tang in the air, and the ache in my lower back that would not quit. The houses in Lincoln Park I cleaned on weekends, kneeling to scrub floors, while I listened to the owners talk in the next room as if I were part of the furniture. I thought of Dan's acceptance letter from Northwestern, the one he held with trembling fingers at the kitchen table, while I laughed and cried at the same time. I thought of the notepad where I had written numbers until the ink went faint and the paper went soft, trying to make tuition and rent exist in the same month. There had never been much room in those years for fancy dinners. Saturday came with a cold that snuck into my bones despite the sunlight. Chicago had that trick. From my bedroom closet, I pulled out the dark gray dress I had worn to Dan and Brooke's wedding. The seams were still strong. The fabric held its shape, forgiving enough where I needed it, simple enough not to attract too many questions. I laid it out on the bed and smoothed a hand over it. On the dresser, my mother's old silver necklace waited in a small ceramic dish chain tangled around itself. I sat on the edge of the bed and worked the knot free with careful fingers. In the living room, a manila folder sat half-tucked under a stack of grocery circulars on the coffee table. The corner of a logo peeked out, stylized letters in deep red. Ember and Oak. I could see the font without pulling the folder free. For a moment, my hand hovered over it. Then I left it where it was and went to change. By 6:30, I was on the L, the train rattling toward downtown. The windows framed the city as it rose and tightened around us, brick and glass and steel closing in. My reflection rode along in the dark glass, layered over bright billboards and office lights. When I stepped off at the lake stop, the air hit me like a different world. The sidewalks here were cleaned often. The people moved differently, shoes tapping fast on the concrete coats cut just so. The sky between the buildings was a narrow strip of color. Ember and Oak sat on the corner of Wabash, and an alley strung with small lights, all dark brick and metal trim. The windows glowed warm, the name etched in gold on the glass. When I pulled open the heavy door, a wash of sound and scent met me at once. Roasted meat, garlic butter, laughter, low music, the clink of glass on glass. Inside, everything was soft and deliberate. Exposed beams overhead, tables dressed in white linen, leather banquettes that looked like they had never seen a stain. A host stand faced the door, a young woman in black behind it, her hair smoothed into a perfect knot at the base of her neck. She glanced up and smiled a professional smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm with the Cole party," I said. "They should be under my son's name, Daniel Cole." She ran a manicured finger down a list on a sleek tablet. "Yes, party of 5 at 7. You're the first to arrive." Her eyes flicked over my dress, my coat, my face, then softened just a fraction. "Right this way, Ms. Cole." We moved through the dining room together, weaving between tables. Couples bent their heads toward each other, talking in low voices. A group of men in suits laughed too loudly at the bar. Someone's steak arrived at a nearby table, the smell of char and fat momentarily overwhelming everything else. As we passed the open arch that led toward the kitchen, I could feel the heat from the line brush my cheek. A server pushed through the swinging door arms stacked with plates, the word behind passing automatically from his lips. I had walked that path more times than I could count. The hostess stopped. "Here we are," she said. Table 17 sat near the back wall, half tucked into a corner. From there, you could see almost the entire room. 4 place settings gleamed under the light silver and glass lined with perfect edges. The 5th chair sat empty, its stretch of table bare except for a folded napkin. Dan sat with his back to the wall facing the room. Brooke was to his right, her blonde hair falling in loose waves over a sleeveless black dress. Across from them, Robert and Judith Harrington occupied their seats as if they came with titles. Judith's string of pearls lay at her throat, heavy and white against her skin. For a moment, none of them saw me. I stood there and watched them, all of them dressed in a kind of ease I had never quite learned. Then Dan looked up and our eyes met. "Mom," he said already, half rising from his chair, "you made it." I pulled my coat a little tighter around my shoulders, then let it fall open. Of course I answered and stepped toward the empty chair waiting for me at their table. Brooke stood as I reached the table, the movement graceful and contained like she had practiced it. "Linda," she said, leaning in to kiss the air just beside my cheek. Her perfume was citrus and something sharp underneath. "You look nice. Very classic." "Thank you," I answered. Her eye slid down my dress and back up again. "Is it vintage?" she asked. She managed to put a smile inside the word and still make it sound like an evaluation. Judith Harrington dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, even though she had not started eating. Her pearls glowed softly against her navy dress. "Oh, I love a good vintage piece," Judith said. "They have so much character." Robert gave me a brisk nod from his chair across the table. His tie was the exact shade of the leather on the banquette. "Linda," he said, as if he had just confirmed my name on a form. "Good to see you." I slid into the empty chair beside Dan. The space in front of me held only a folded napkin. 4 place settings around me caught the chandelier light and scattered it. Dan sank back down into his seat. "You made it," he repeated as though there had been a chance I would not. "I said I would," I replied. "I try to be on time." Brooke laughed softly. "That is one thing I will say about your mom," she told Dan. "She is very reliable." The way she said it made me think of the phrase, "reliable transportation, something you tick off on an application." A waiter appeared at the edge of the table, young and smooth, faced his dark hair neatly combed. He held a stack of leather-bound menus against his forearm. "Good evening," he said. "Welcome to Ember and Oak." He placed a menu in front of Brooke, one in front of Dan, one in front of Judith, one in front of Robert. Then he hesitated, his hand hovering over the last menu as his gaze flicked toward me. Brooke did not give him time to decide. "She is fine," she said lightly. "She will just have water." The menu in his hand hung in the air for a beat. His eyes shifted to me, an apology already forming. I felt the familiar urge to rescue the person who had done nothing wrong. "It is all right," I told him. "Water is fine." He swallowed, nodded once, and tucked the last menu under his arm, as if that had been the plan all along. Judith opened her menu with a practiced flick. "So much to choose from," she said. "Everything sounds decadent." Dan cleared his throat. "Have you been here before?" he asked her, eager. "Robert said the chef trained in New York." Judith tilted her head as she scanned the page. "Of course," she said. "This is one of Robert's clients. We bring people here when we want to impress them." Something flickered in Dan's eyes. He straightened a little more. Brooke had not opened her menu at all. She smiled at the waiter instead. "We will start with the bone marrow and the truffle fries for the table," she said. 4 of the ribeyes, medium rare with the roasted mushrooms and grilled asparagus, and a bottle of the Camus. Her hand made a small circular gesture that seemed to include everyone and no one. The waiter's pen moved quickly over his pad. "Yes, ma'am." "And for you, ma'am?" he asked, glancing at me again just in case. Brooke answered before I could inhale. "She is good with water." Brooke repeated, her tone bright. "She is watching her cholesterol." The corners of Robert's mouth twitched. He lifted his water glass instead of his wine and took a sip. Dan shifted beside me, his knee bumping mine under the table, like it used to when he was small and could not sit still in church. Back then he would whisper apologies into my sleeve. Now he stared straight ahead. He leaned toward me close enough that I could see the tiny pores along his jawline. His voice dropped low. "Mom," he muttered, "it is a steakhouse." "You do not eat red meat anyway. It is fine." He sounded like someone trying to talk a problem away. "This is perfect," I said. "I am not hungry." My stomach twisted at the lie, but my voice did not. The waiter took the wine glasses from Robert and Judith to fill them, then Brooke's, then Dan's. When he reached my place, he hesitated again, the bottle hovering in midair as if he could conjure a glass from nothing. Brooke shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Just water," she said for the 3rd time, even though the glass already sat in front of me. The wine bottle made a soft, glugging sound as he moved on. The scent of dark berries and oak floated across the table and then away. I lifted my own glass. The ice had begun to melt at the edges, slicking the cubes into each other. Cold seeped into the pads of my fingers. Linda Judith said, her voice warm in a way that did not quite match the look in her eyes. "Dan tells us you are still in the same apartment on the west side." "Yes," I said. "The rent is reasonable. It suits me." Judith nodded as if mentally approving a sensible but dull purchase. That part of town has quite a bit of history, she added. It is just a bit rough, is it not? Brooke crossed one leg over the other and let her heel dangle. The light caught the small diamond at her ankle. We have been talking about that, she said. About Lily going over there so often. It is not exactly the environment we want her to get used to. Dan's knee jumped again. This time he stilled it quickly. We appreciate everything you do with her, of course, Brooke added, looking straight at me. The baking, the park, the little crafts. It is sweet. Sweet was not a compliment in her mouth. I like having her around, I said. She likes it too. Kids like a lot of things, Robert said. That does not mean they are good for them. He smiled as he said it as if he had just made a mild joke. Our appetizers arrived set down in the center of the table. Golden marrow glistened in the bone, the truffle fries steaming beside it, salt visible on their crisp edges. The smell was rich enough to taste. Brooke reached for a slice of toasted bread, scraped marrow onto it with a delicate clink of metal on bone, and offered it to Dan. He took it from her fingers. Try it, she said. It is incredible. He bit into it, closed his eyes for a second, and hummed an appreciative sound. Judith took her portion. Robert found his piece easily. None of them looked at the empty space in front of me. The waiter passed by again and topped off my water. This time he did not meet my eyes. His jaw was tight. So Judith said, Tell me, Linda, what do you do with your time these days? She speared a fry its end dark with truffle oil. I work, I answered. Brooke laughed once, a short sound. She picks up shifts here and there, Brooke said to her parents. She likes to stay busy. The way she said here and there turned years of labor into a hobby. I have kept busy since before Dan was born, I said. Judith waved a hand as if brushing away smoke. Of course, she said. Your generation worked very hard. It is what you knew. Things were different then. You clocked in, you clocked out. Stability mattered more than strategy. She dabbed at her lips again. Nowadays, she went on, it is not just about working hard. It is about working smart, planning, thinking long-term, knowing how to leverage opportunities. My fingers tightened around the water glass. I planned, I said quietly. Robert leaned in. You did the best you could with what you had, he said. We understand that. You just did not have access to the kind of financial literacy people have now. Dad helped us so much, Brooke added quickly, turning to Dan. Remember the Roth IRA talk when we first got engaged? Judith smiled. And look at you now, she said to Dan. On track for a regional position, a real future. That is what thoughtful planning does. Dan flushed. He took a gulp of wine he did not seem to taste. The steaks arrived on heavy plates, each cut seared dark at the edges, pink bleeding through the center as the server sliced them in front of us. Butter pooled on the porcelain, catching the candlelight. Platters of roasted mushrooms and asparagus followed. The waiter set one steak in front of Brooke, one in front of Dan, one for Judith, one for Robert. He adjusted their knives with practiced precision. My space on the table remained a neat stretch of linen, broken only by the circle of my water glass. A draft from the air conditioner moved over my arms. Goosebumps rose on my skin. Dan carved off a piece of steak and put it in his mouth. He chewed, then swallowed. This is really good, he said more to his father-in-law than anyone else. Robert nodded. Ember and oak do not mess around, he said. I have sent a lot of clients here. They remember who brought them. Judith lifted her wine glass. To new deals and new doors, she said. Their glasses clinked against one another. I lifted my water, let the rim touch my lips without drinking. Brooke placed her knife down for a moment. Her rings flashed. Oh, she said suddenly. We closed on the condo this week. She looked at her parents, then at me. 900,000, she said, satisfaction curling around the number. West Loop, corner unit, floor-to-ceiling windows, Riverview doorman, private gym, secure parking. Totally renovated. Our realtor said we practically stole it. Judith exhaled like someone looking at a painting she approved of. That is a very smart move, she said. Property there will only go up. Robert raised his glass again. 2 smart moves, he said. And to finally having your own space, on your own level. Brooke smiled, leaning closer to Dan. Her hand rested briefly on his forearm, proprietorial. The best part, she said, glancing at me, is the privacy. No surprise visits, no awkward drop-ins, no trying to squeeze extra people into a small space when we are hosting. We can control our environment. Her words sat between us without a cushion. Dan cleared his throat. What she means is that we can schedule things better, he said, so no one gets overwhelmed. Brooke did not correct him. She kept her eyes on me. You understand, right, Linda? She asked. We are at a stage where boundaries are healthy. I let the word settle. Boundaries? I repeated. My voice came out steady enough. Judith took a small bite of asparagus. Speaking of Lily, Judith said, as if the transition were natural, we have been talking about her education. She is at such a critical age. My forkless hand stilled in my lap. I thought she was doing well at her school, I said. She is, Judith agreed. But we think she would benefit from being in a different environment, one where her peers come from families who can truly broaden her horizons. Brooke squeezed Dan's arm. People who can take her to Paris and not just to the park, she added lightly. I saw a flash in my mind. Lily at my tiny kitchen table, flower on her nose, laughing at a crooked cookie shape, her small hand sliding into mine as we crossed a cracked sidewalk, the way she pressed her face to the aquarium glass at the free day downtown. She seems happy, I said. Brooke tilted her head. She is a child, she said. She is happy with whatever is in front of her. That is why it is our job to curate what is in front of her. Judith nodded. We have been looking into a private academy in Lincoln Park, Judith said. Very selective. They emphasize leadership, innovation, global awareness. Her classmates would be the children of people who can actually open doors for her, not just watch her for a few hours. The last sentence floated out gently, then landed hard. Robert wiped his knife clean with a piece of bread. We do not want her picking up habits that will hold her back, he added. Lower expectations. Small ways of thinking. My throat tightened. What does that mean, I asked, in terms of me seeing her? Brooke set her fork down with a small click. It means she said we may need to be more intentional about how often she goes over to your place, about what she associates with home and comfort. We do not want her to get too attached to things we are trying to move her past. I stared at the empty space in front of me. My water had gone lukewarm. The ice cubes were half the size they had been. At her birthday, Judith said, as if remembering an amusing anecdote, several of the parents asked me who you were. They thought you were part of the staff. You were so busy with the cake and the plates. One woman even tried to hand you her coat. She laughed softly at the memory. Brooke joined in. It was a little awkward, Brooke said. Trying to explain you were Dan's mother. People were surprised you know that the grandmother did not quite fit the picture. She made a vague gesture, sweeping her hand toward her own face, her hair the room. Dan did not laugh. He kept his eyes on his plate, cutting his steak into smaller and smaller pieces. He did not protest either. My fingers left a damp prints on the glass when I finally set it down. I wiped them away with the edge of my napkin, a small automatic movement. Around us, the restaurant swelled and dipped with conversation. A table near the bar erupted into a brief cheer. Someone opened the front door and a slice of cool air drifted in. Forks clicked against plates, wine poured. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pan sizzled loud enough to cut through everything for a second. I sat very still and listened to all of it. Judith picked up the thread of chatter with Brooke, something about Christmas travel plans and Aspen snow conditions. Robert and Dan fell into a talk about the possibility of a promotion next quarter, about targets and territories. I let their words wash over me without catching on any. Instead, I began to count. Not numbers exactly, but moments, piled on top of one another like dishes in a sink. The look in the waiter's eyes when he held back my menu, the triple repetition of just water, the way Brooke said vintage, the way Judith said lower expectations, the way no one reached for the empty stretch of table in front of me. A server came with a tray of desserts for the neighboring table. Chocolate cake, creme brulee, something with berries and cream. The caramelized sugar on top of the custard cracked under the spoon with a sound that somehow felt personal. Our own plates had been cleared. In front of me, my glass of water had been refilled again. A second ring had formed on the linen beneath it, overlapping the first. The check arrived in a black folder balanced on the waiter's hand. He set it discreetly near Robert, who nudged it toward Dan with barely a glance. Dan opened it. His eyebrows did not move. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a sleek black card, and slid it inside. The motion was smooth, unhurried, a habit. "Worth it?" Robert said, folding his napkin. "You can always tell a serious place by the bill." Judith smiled. "And by how the staff treats you," she added. "Service was excellent." The words brushed against me and kept going. The waiter returned, took the folder, then came back once more for Dan's signature. Dan signed with a quick, looping flourish, the letters of his name stretched and embellished. I watched his hand move, remembering the crooked two large letters of a boy writing his name on notebook paper for the first time. Chairs scraped as everyone began to stand. "We should do this more often," Judith said, slipping her arms into her coat sleeves. "Family time is important." Brooke checked her phone with one hand, her other arm already in her jacket. "We have to be up early," she reminded Dan. "The movers are bringing the rest of the furniture. Traffic will be a nightmare." Dan turned to me. "Come on, Mom," he said, offering me his hand. "We will walk you to the train." For a moment, I looked at his hand, palm up, fingers ready to curl around mine. Then I placed my own hands on the arms of my chair and pushed myself up without taking his. "I need to use the restroom first," I said. "You go ahead. I will only be a minute." Brooke gave a small, tight smile. "Do not take too long," she said. "It is freezing out there." Judith adjusted her scarf, pearls catching the light. Robert glanced at his watch. Dan hesitated, then nodded. "We will wait by the door," he said. I watched as they walked away through the maze of tables. Robert's hand rested lightly at the small of Judith's back. Brooke's heels clicked a crisp rhythm against the floor. Dan trailed half a step behind, shoulders slightly hunched, hands in his pockets. At the entrance near the host's stand, they paused. The hostess smiled at them. Dan said something I could not hear. None of them looked back. I picked up my coat and slipped it on, but I did not walk toward the restrooms. The path to the bathrooms was to the left, past the bar and a framed map of Chicago. I turned right instead. The lighting shifted subtly as I moved away from the golden pools over the tables and into a narrower hallway lined with framed black and white photos of kitchens and chefs. At the end of the hallway, a metal door weighted its paint-worn smooth around the handle. A small sign at eye level read, "Employees Only." From the other side came a muted rush of sound, sharper than the hum of the dining room. The rapid staccato of knives on cutting boards, a burst of laughter in Spanish, the hiss of a grill as something hit hot metal, the kitchen heart of ember and oak beating just out of sight. I stopped in front of the door. My hand rose and settled around the cool metal of the handle. For a heartbeat, I stood there feeling the vibration of the kitchen through the door. A pot clanged against something hard. Someone called out an order. The air on this side smelled like perfume and grilled steak. The air on the other side would smell like sweat and smoke and onions. I turned the handle and pushed. Heat met me first, a warm wall that wrapped my face and shoulders. The sounds sharpened, lost their velvet. Knives hit cutting boards in quick little bursts. A ticket machine spat out thin slips of paper. Voices overlapped English and Spanish, and the shorthand of people who had done this together for a long time. The floor back here was bare tile, slick in places from a recent mop. The light was brighter, all white and stainless steel, nothing soft about it. The line stretched in a straight shot down one side station after station. Grill, sauté, salads, desserts. Bodies moved in choreography that would have looked like chaos to anyone who did not know better. A runner almost collided with me, then stopped short, balancing 2 plates on his forearms. "Oh, sorry, Miss Cole," he said. He shifted his weight and slid past me without waiting for an answer. 2 more staff members darted by, offering nods and quick greetings. "Evening, Ms. Cole." "How are you tonight, Ms. Cole?" The words slipped out of them without thought, as natural as saying behind on the line. No one called me Linda back here. Near the pass under the hot lamps, Marco stood with his clipboard. He was checking tickets, attention flicking between the plates and the slips of paper above them. His white shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms dotted with pale scars that matched mine. He looked up just as I stepped around a stack of crates and into the center of the path. For a moment, his face went still. Then he was moving toward me, weaving through the line with an ease he had earned. "Ms. Cole," he said quietly, "I saw you at table 17. His eyes searched my face. There was no smile now, only a tight concern in the lines around his mouth. Are you all right? He asked. I glanced over his shoulder. The expediter called out a table number. A cook laid a steak onto a plate with a careful hand. A server checked a ticket on the rail and called for a side dish. I am fine, I said. It was not about fine. That word only meant I was standing upright. They gave me something very useful, I added. His brow furrowed. Useful, he repeated. Clarity, I said. The furrow smoothed. Understanding settled over his features. Ah, he said. So that is what that was. We stepped aside so the servers could move past our backs to a stack of clean plates that waited on a lower shelf. There was a time years ago when I would have been on the other side of this conversation. Younger by more than a decade, wearing shoes that hurt at the end of a double shift, my hands red from bleach and hot water. I would have been the one carrying plates, not the one everyone reported to. Marco had been there for most of the distance between then and now. You have never sat in the dining room like that, he said. Not once in 12 years. I wanted to see something, I replied. I looked at my hands. They were still a little damp from the condensation on the water glass. I got my answer. He exhaled through his nose. And it was not the answer you were hoping for, he said. It was the answer that was true, I said. From the other end of the kitchen, someone called his name. He lifted a hand to show he had heard, but did not move. They did not know who you are, he said softly. The words did not come with judgment. They came with a kind of sorrow. No, I said. They knew exactly who they thought I was. That was the point. When I first signed the papers for Ember and Oak, my hand had shaken so badly the banker slid the forms closer and told me to take my time. The memory flashed quick and clean. A small office fluorescent light, a man in a suit across from me, his fingers steepled. A printed stack of terms, interest rates, balloon payments. The smell of stale coffee. You are sure about this? He had asked. I had thought of the kitchen jobs, the prep work, the double shifts on the line, the way my heart steadied when I was near a stove. I had thought of the tiny inheritance from my mother, the only money that had ever come to me without a punch clock. I'm sure I had said and signed. After that had come the empty space that would become Ember and Oak. Bare brick walls, concrete floor, dusty enough to leave prints on my shoes. I had stood in the middle of it with a tape measure and a notebook. While Marco, 10 years younger and still just a sous chef at another place, walked through with me gesturing where the line should go, where the hood needed to be built, where a walk-in would fit. I had chosen the tables myself, the wood grain, the finish. I had stood in the kitchen during staff training, watching new servers learn the table numbers, the station chart, the rotation. I had written the first menu in pencil at my little kitchen table at home, crossing out and rewriting prices until they made sense. For 15 years, my name had stayed off the website and out of the press releases. The investors were listed as a group. Management was credited as a team. To the world, the owner of Ember and Oak was a faceless corporation with a bland name that meant nothing. To the staff, it was me. I wanted to know. I said to Marco if Dan would treat me the same when he thought I was just an old woman with a small apartment on the west side. Just his mother. Nothing else. Marco looked at me a long moment. And now you know, he said. And now I know, I echoed. Someone behind us shouted for a runner. A bell dinged. Another steak hit the grill. Marco shifted his clipboard, the metal clip glinting under the lights. What do you want to do? He asked. The question settled between us heavy and real. I let my gaze travel along the line. The grill cook was wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. The salad station was tossing greens. A dishwasher pushed a rack of clean glasses into place, the sound of soft clatter. These people had seen me scrub floors when a cleaner did not show up. They had seen me carry trays when we were short-staffed. They had seen me send home a busser who was sick and take his side, work myself. They had watched me build this place piece by piece, plate by plate. They called me Ms. Cole not because of the papers in a drawer, but because I signed their checks and showed up when the hood malfunctioned at 3 a.m. I want you to bring me the quarterly paperwork, I said. The stuff you were going to leave on my desk. He lifted the clipboard. Some of it is right here, he said. The rest is in the office. Bring the part you have, I told him. And in a few minutes I will be standing in the dining room by table 17's section. His gaze sharpened. I see, he said. When you come out, I went on. I want you to address me the way you always do in front of the staff. Ask me for my signature, loud enough that our neighbors can hear you. A slow smile began to pull at the corner of his mouth. It was not amused. It was something closer to satisfaction. It would be my pleasure, Ms. Cole, he said. At the host stand, I said, thinking aloud now, they may try to hurry my party out. Make sure they do not leave without me. I will tell them we need your approval before we comp anything, he said. That will keep them close. I huffed a short breath that almost counted as a laugh. Always thinking, I said. He lifted the clipboard in a small salute. It is what you pay me for, he replied. I thought of another name, one that had come up at the table. Alan Drake, CEO of Northline Freight. He liked the corner booth on Thursdays. He ordered the same bourbon every time and always asked about the specials. By the way, I said make sure Mr. Drake's standing reservation for next month is confirmed. His assistant gets twitchy if she thinks we forgot him. Marco nodded. It is already on the books, he said. I nodded once. Good, I said. We stood there a moment longer, side by side, watching the kitchen move. Give me 3 minutes, I told him. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 3 minutes, he confirmed. Then I will come find you. I left him there and walked through to the small office off the back hallway. The door was propped open. Inside a metal desk sat under a bulletin board covered in staff schedules and scribbled notes. A monitor glowed with the soft light of the point-of-sale system data scrolling slowly. A stack of invoices waited in a tray. On the far wall in a simple frame hung the original business license for Ember and Oak. My name was printed neatly on the line for owner. I paused in the doorway and looked at it. The paper had yellowed a little around the edges. The ink was still dark. Then I turned away and retraced my steps through the kitchen. The staff parted from me when I passed like water around a stone. Behind me I heard Marco giving an instruction, his tone crisp and calm. At the swinging door I pushed with the flat of my hand and stepped back into the dining room. The light dropped again into something softer. The hum of conversation reassembled itself around me. The smell shifted back to the blend of clone wine and grilled meat that now felt oddly thin. Our table had already been cleared and reset. Fresh white linen, new silverware lined up, a small candle centered in the middle, its flame unbothered. It was as if we had never sat there at all. I stood for a moment beside the empty table, looking at the 5 chairs. One of them had held me and my glass of water. The others had held people who had not once wondered why there was no plate in front of me. From where I stood, I had a clear view of the entrance. Through the tall front windows, I saw them on the sidewalk under the awning. Brooke had her phone in her hand. Judith adjusted her scarf. Robert checked the time on his watch. Dan stood a step apart, his breath visible in the cold air, his head turned slightly back toward the door. The hostess said something to them. She gestured in my direction, a question on her face. Brooke frowned, confused. Judith looked annoyed. Robert shrugged. Dan glanced through the glass, and for a second his eyes met mine before the reflection caught and broke the line. They all turned and came back inside. The air shifted as the front door opened, a brief gust of outside slipping past my cheeks. Their coats fell open as they walked. The hostess hovered near the stand, unsure whether to lead them or stay put. Mom, Dan said. When he reached me, his voice pitched low. His cheeks were flushed from the cold. What are you doing? He asked. We were about to leave. Brooke stood just behind him, her jaw tight. Judith and Robert flanked them, forming a neat little wall. You are making this weird, Brooke said. People are looking. Dan leaned closer, his voice dropping further. You are embarrassing us, he whispered. The words slid into place like a final puzzle piece. Embarrassing. I let it sit there between us, heavy and familiar. Am I asked. My tone was mild. My hands rested at my sides. The dining room moved around us slower now, the way a street seems to quiet around an accident. I could feel the weight of eyes turning toward us just at the edges. Curiosity pricked the air. Behind me at the kitchen door, the metal swung softly on its hinges. From the corner of my vision, I saw Marco step through a clipboard in his hand. He walked toward us with the steady stride he used in pre-shift meetings, the one that said he was about to give instructions and expected people to listen. The dining room noise thinned as he approached, not stopping, just softening as if someone had turned a dial. He stopped at my side, his body angled toward me but his voice carrying outward. Ms. Cole, he said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need the owner's signature on the quarterly reports before we lock up. Silence happened in layers, first at our little circle, then at the nearest table, then in the space behind the bar. I felt more than saw heads turn. Brooke blinked. The owner, she repeated. Her gaze darted from Marco to me, then over my shoulder as if someone else might appear and claim the title. Marco nodded. Yes, he said, Ms. Linda Cole, majority owner and managing partner of Ember and Oak. Judith's hand flew to her pearls. Her fingers touched them as if checking they were still there. Robert's jaw shifted once, a tiny movement that looked like someone testing a bad tooth with his tongue. Dan stared at Marco, then at me. His face had gone oddly blank, the kind of expression he wore when he did not know what line to deliver in a meeting. What are you talking about? Brooke said. Her tone was flat, as if the air had been pressed out of it. Marco lifted the clipboard slightly. "These are the operating reports," he said. "Sales expenses, payroll. I cannot close them out without Ms. Cole's approval." He turned the top page so that if anyone cared to look, they would see my name printed on the signature line. Brooke did not look. She looked at me. "Is this a joke?" she asked. Her laugh was short and brittle. It did not sound like something she meant to make. "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear. "I signed the first loan for this place 15 years ago. I wrote the first menu. I hired the first line cooks. I picked the chairs you are standing next to. I let my hand rest for a moment on the back of the chair that had held me. I pay the staff every 2 weeks," I added, including Marco. Judith swallowed. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. Robert spoke first. "If we had known," he started. He did not finish the sentence. The words trailed off, reaching for a shape that would make them harmless. "That is the problem," I said. I turned my head toward him. "You needed to know what I own before deciding how to treat me. I did not need to know anything about your bank account to decide how to treat you." He opened his mouth again, then shut it. His eyes took on the calculating look of a man redrawing a plan in his head. Judith seemed to recover some of her composure. "Well," she said, forcing a small smile, "this is quite a surprise. Dan never mentioned any of this." Her tone implied that the oversight was mine. "I never told him," I replied. "That was deliberate." Dan finally seemed to find his voice. "Mom," he said, "you own this place." The words sounded strange in his mouth, as if he were repeating a line he had heard through a door. "I built this place," I said. "With a bank's help, yes. With a small inheritance. With every hour I put in at jobs nobody brags about to pay the bills while it found its feet." I glanced at Marco. "With a lot of very good people beside me," I added. A busser nearby pretended to polish glasses and failed at pretending not to listen. Brooke shook her head slowly. "You work here," she said. "You said you picked up shifts." I said I worked. I answered. You chose not to ask what that meant. Color rose in 2 bright spots high on her cheeks. "Why would you hide something like this?" Brooke asked. "From your own son." "Because I wanted to see if the way he treated me depended on whether I had money," I said. I turned to Dan. "You never asked why I stopped cleaning houses, why I could stop taking double shifts at the packing plant. You were happy that your tuition checks cleared and that the rent was paid. I was happy to keep it that way." Dan ran a hand through his hair. His fingers trembled. "Mom, I just thought you did not want to talk about work," he said. "You always said you were fine." "I am very good at saying I am fine," I said. My voice was almost gentle. Brooke's eyes narrowed. "So what she said, is this some kind of test?" "In a way," I said. Robert latched onto that. "Well, we failed the test," he said, trying for a wry smile. "Now we know better. That is what matters." He extended a hand toward me as if bridging a gap. I looked at it. "You did not fail because you did not know I owned a restaurant," I said. "You failed because you were comfortable humiliating someone you thought had nothing." Brooke stiffened. "No one humiliated you," she said. "We ordered food. You said you were not hungry. We talked about Lily's future. We are allowed to set standards." She glanced quickly around at the watching faces, then back at me. "You are making this bigger than it is." "The waiter offered me a menu," I said. "You told him I did not need one. You told him 3 times I was fine with water." I felt the eyes of the waiter somewhere behind me, the way a person feels sun on the back of their neck. "You talked about my neighborhood like it was a stain I went on. You talked about my time with Lily as something she needed to be moved past. You laughed when people mistook me for hired help." Dan flinched. Brooke folded her arms. "We were being honest," she said. "We do not want Lily thinking that small. That is not an insult. It is just reality. She is Harrington and she is Cole. There are expectations that come with that. Expectations like treating the person who fed your husband for 18 years as if she does not belong at your table," I said. My voice did not rise, but it stretched a little thinner. Judith stepped in again, trying to smooth what could no longer be smoothed. "You have to understand," she said. "We thought you were well struggling. We did not want Dan to feel pressured to support you. We wanted him to focus on his career on providing for his own family." Her eyes flicked to Dan, to Robert, to the nearby tables. "Of course, now that we know you're doing quite well," she continued, "this is all a misunderstanding." I let the words sit on my tongue for a moment. "Misunderstanding," I repeated. I shook my head. "It was very clear," I said. "You respected what you thought I did not have. You respected Dan's title, Robert's connections, your own comfort. You did not respect the woman sitting at your table." I turned back to Dan. "And you let them speak to me that way," I said, without saying a word. His mouth open-closed. The flush had drained from his face. He looked almost gray. I was trying not to start a fight he managed. I did not want to make a scene. You did not want to make a scene, I said, so you let them make me small instead. He took a step closer. Mom, he said. I did not know about the restaurant. I did not know about any of this. If I had known, I would never have let them treat you like that. That is exactly what I mean, I said. Marco shifted his clipboard against his side. He kept his eyes on me, but I knew he was holding the whole room in his peripheral vision, gauging the temperature. Do you remember Alan Drake? I asked Dan. Dan stared at me. He is my CEO, he said slowly, at Northline. He is also a regular here, I said. He and his wife come in on Thursdays. They like the corner booth. I have had lunch with him 3 times this year to talk about a charity he wants Ember and Oak to support. I let that settle. If I had wanted to, I went on, I could have mentioned your name. I could have talked about how hard you work, how you deserve that regional position you keep talking about. I could have opened a door for you with one conversation over bourbon and steak. Dan's eyes widened. Then he dropped his gaze to the floor. I did not do that, I said, because I thought you should earn what you have without your mother smoothing the way, because I wanted to see whether you would treat me well even if I could do nothing for your career. He winced. I guess you got your answer, he said quietly. Yes, I said. Brooke licked her lips. So now what, she asked. You cut us off, you punish us, you keep Lily away from us. Her voice sharpened as she spoke, the smooth edges gone. You cannot do that, she said. She is our daughter. I am not taking Lily away from you, I said. I do not have that power, and I would not use it even if I did. I felt every word as I laid it down. But I can decide who I spend my time with, I added. I can decide what I allow into my home and into my life. Judith frowned. What are you saying? She asked. I am saying, I replied, that I will not be coming to your house for holidays. I will not be sitting at tables where I am treated as less than. I will not be available as a convenient babysitter when it fits your schedule, but not your idea of the right image. I drew a breath, let it out slowly. I love Lily, I said. If you bring her to see me because you want her to know me, I will open my door. I will bake cookies with her. I will take her to the park and the library and the free days at the museum. But I will not keep pretending we are a happy family while you cut me down and expect me to smile about it. Brooke shook her head again. You are overreacting, she said. You are emotional. This is all about pride. Yes, I said. The word surprised her enough that she stopped. It is about the fact that I spent years taking whatever was given because I did not think I could ask for more, I said. I am done with that. Robert tried one last pivot. Look, he said, emotions are running high. We can all sit down, have a drink, talk this through. We are reasonable people. Marco spoke for the first time since the introduction. I'm going to have to ask you not to block the walkway any longer, he said, his tone polite but firm. Other guests need to move through. Robert stared at him. We are in the middle of a family matter, Robert said. This is Ms. Cole's restaurant, Marco replied. It is still her responsibility to make sure everyone else has a good evening. He looked at me. If you want the check adjusted in any way, he added, we can do that later. I do not want the check adjusted, I said. They paid for exactly what they ordered. I looked at each of them in turn. I'm going home now, I told them. I would like you to leave. Brooke stared at me as if I had spoken another language. You cannot just tell us to get out, she said. Yes, I said. The word felt simple. I can. Judith's mouth opened, then closed. Robert's shoulders drew back, his spine stiff. This is ridiculous, Judith whispered. After everything we have included you in, this is how you behave. You invited me to a dinner where you made sure I had nothing to eat and a lot to swallow, I said. That is not inclusion. Dan stepped forward again. Mom, please, he said. His voice broke on the last word. Do not do this. I looked at him. Really looked. The man in front of me had my son's eyes and my son's hands, but there was a layer of something over him now. Fear, ambition, habit. I did not know where one ended and the other began. The decision was made 2 hours ago, I said. You all made it when you decided how comfortable you were making me small. I turned slightly toward Marco. Would you please show them out? I asked. Of course, Ms. Cole, he said. He gestured toward the door. Right this way, sir, ma'am, he said to Robert and Judith. We appreciate your business. Judith drew herself up. This will not be forgotten, she said. Her eyes were hot, not with tears, with anger. No, I said, it will not. Brooke grabbed her coat from the back of a nearby chair. Her hands shook as she slid her arms into the sleeves. This is insane, she said. You are throwing your family away to prove a point. I am choosing how I am treated, I said. You are deciding what to do with that. She snorted softly and turned on her heel. Robert followed his hand at the small of Judith's back, ushering her toward the door. Their path through the dining room left a faint wake behind them like a boat cutting water. Dan stayed. He looked at Marco. "Can you give us a minute?" Dan asked him. Marco glanced at me. "It is your call," he said. I nodded. "1 minute," I said. Marco stepped back far enough to give us a pocket of space, but he did not disappear. Dan raked both hands through his hair, now messing it in a way I had not seen since he was a teenager. "Mom," he said, "I am so sorry." His voice was rough. "I should have said something the second Brooke told the waiter no menu," he went on. "I should have told my parents-in-law to stop. I should have walked out with you. I did not." I sat there like a coward. I saw your glass. I saw your hands. I heard every word, and I let it happen. His eyes shone. "I'm ashamed," he said. The word hung there different from embarrassed, heavier. "I am ashamed of myself." He reached for my arm. I let his fingers close around my sleeve. "I can fix this," he said. "I will talk to Brooke. I will talk to my in-laws. I will tell them they cannot talk to you like that. I will bring Lily over every week. I will call you. I will take you to dinner, real dinner, anywhere you want. I swear I will do better." His shoulders shook once. "Please," he said, "please do not write me off." For a moment, my throat tightened hard enough that I could not breathe. Every instinct I had built as a mother urged me to pull him in to say it was all right to tell him we would figure it out. But the picture of him at the table silent while they carved and I held my water stayed sharp. "The problem is not whether you can offer to buy me dinner," I said. "The problem is that it took finding out I own a restaurant for you to remember I am your mother." He shook his head. "That is not it," he said. "I love you. I just got caught between everyone. I tried to keep the peace." "You kept their peace," I said, "not mine." He swallowed hard. "I know that now," he said. "No," I said. "You know it because you saw my name on a piece of paper, because you imagined what I might be able to do for your career, because suddenly in your head I moved into a different category of person you should not let people insult." He opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. His eyes dropped. I reached up and gently loosened his hand from my arm. "Go home," Dan, I said. "Be a good father to Lily. Be the kind of man you want her to admire. If one day you can look at me and treat me kindly without calculating what I am worth on paper, you know where I live." His face crumpled. "I do not want to lose you," he said. "You already had more of me than you noticed," I said. Marco moved closer, respectful but present. "Sir," he said to Dan, "your group is waiting." Dan wiped at his face quickly as if ashamed of his own tears. He nodded, then looked at me one last time. "I am sorry," he said again. He turned away before I could answer, his shoulders tight. I watched him walk the length of the dining room, past the tables, past the bar, to the door, where Brooke and her parents stood in a cluster. Brooke said something sharp. Robert placed a hand on Dan's shoulder. Judith watched me through the glass, even as she stepped outside. The door opened. Cold air rushed in then out. The four of them moved through the frame in a small, messy knot. The door closed behind them. The glass reflected the warm light inside, turning their shapes into faint shadows before they were gone. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of cutlery and conversation rise back up around me, filling in the space they had left. Then I let out a breath I had not realized I had been holding. For a moment I just stood there beside the empty table in the soft light and low noise. A server slipped by with a tray of cocktails balanced on his palm. Someone at the bar laughed sharp and quick, then caught themselves when they noticed me. Marco came to stand at my shoulder. He did not step too close. "Do you want to sit down for a minute?" he asked. His voice was quiet the way it was after a long Friday service when everyone was tired and a little thinner at the edges. I shook my head. "If I sit, I may not get back up," I said. The corner of his mouth lifted. "You signed the reports already," he said, lifting the clipboard. "You are done for tonight." It took me a second to remember that I had not actually signed anything yet. Everything that had happened in the last half hour had pushed the original reason for his approach out of my mind. "Give it here," I said. We stepped over to a side station away from the center of the room. There was a pen clipped to the board. I took it and signed my name where it waited at the bottom of the page. The letters came easily. I did not add flourishes. My hand was steady. "Thank you," he said. He tapped the papers into a neat stack. "Do you want me to call you a car?" he asked. "It is cold out. I have mine," I said. "It is in the lot down the block." "Then at least let someone walk you to the door," he replied. "I can manage," I said. He hesitated, then nodded. "You know," he said, "I have seen you pull double shifts, handle inspectors, and run a line with no dishwasher and half the staff calling in sick. He met my eyes. I have never seen you do that, he said. I did not ask what he meant. We both knew. Lock up when you are done, I said. Yes, Ms. Cole, he answered. He turned back toward the kitchen. I walked toward the front. The hostess straightened when she saw me coming. She held out my coat without being asked. Her hands moved carefully, respectful. Good night, Miss Cole, she said. Get home safe. Good night, I answered. The cold hit my face as soon as I stepped outside. The air smelled faintly of exhaust and winter sharp in my throat. Downtown had thinned a little. The after-dinner crowds had mostly moved on. Here and there, groups of people huddled in coats, laughing, waiting for rides. The spot where my family had stood earlier was empty. I walked to the lot where my car sat under a streetlight, its hood dusted with a thin layer of grit. The lock clicked open under my thumb. The interior smelled like old coffee and the faint hint of the pine air freshener I had bought at the gas station months ago. The engine turned over on the second try. I pulled out of the lot and turned toward home. The city slid past in a mix of glass, brick, and shadows. Red and green traffic lights reflected on the wet pavement. A siren rose somewhere behind me, wailed past and faded. I turned the radio on, then off again. At a stoplight, I pressed my palms flat against the steering wheel and felt how tired they were. The streets grew narrower and quieter as I reached my neighborhood. Storefronts were dark, their metal grates pulled down. A laundromat sign hummed in flickering blue. A corner store glowed under harsh light, a man in a knit cap standing outside with his hands in his pockets. I parked in my usual spot behind my building between a dented pickup and a small sedan with a broken taillight covered in red tape. The air was colder back here, trapped by brick walls and dumpsters. My breath showed in short white puffs as I walked to the back door and climbed the stairs. Inside, the hallway smelled like old paint and cooking oils. Someone on the floor below was watching a game, a commentator's voice rising and falling through the thin ceiling. The radiator hissed in my apartment when I opened the door, fighting the cold. I closed the door behind me and leaned my back against it. The quiet wrapped around me. It was different from the quiet in the restaurant. There, silence had edges. Here, it was just space. My coat slid from my shoulders and landed in a heap at my feet. I did not bother to pick it up. I moved to the kitchen like someone walking underwater. The clock over the stove said 9:40. The cookies I had baked that afternoon still sat in a plastic container on the counter, a few crumbs scattered around it. The drawing from Lily was still on the fridge held by the lemon magnet. Two stick figures with big smiles stood side by side under a crooked sun. One had short hair. One had hair that floated out around a round head. Above them, in shaky purple letters, she had written, Grandma and Me. My chest tightened so suddenly that I had to grab the edge of the counter. The first sob came out without sound. My body just folded. I pressed my forehead to my forearm and let it come. Breaths hitching, shoulders shaking. I cried for the boy who had sat at my second-hand kitchen table with a backpack too big for his shoulders and told me he wanted to be someone. I cried for the man who had sat at my restaurant and decided keeping the peace was worth more than keeping his mother from being humiliated. I cried for the little girl in the drawing who loved both of us without knowing the lines we had just drawn between ourselves. Tears fell onto the laminate. I watched them spread and disappear into the worn pattern. Eventually the tightness eased. The sobs thinned into small, uneven breaths. I straightened slowly and reached for a paper towel, wiped my face, then blew my nose loud enough to startle myself. The sound made the apartment feel less delicate. My phone vibrated on the counter near the sink. The screen lit up with Dan's name. I froze for a second, then picked it up. There was a message waiting. Mom, I am so sorry. I know I do not deserve you. I was wrong today. I have been wrong for a long time. I forgot who you are. Please let me try to make this right. I read it once, then again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Words rose and scattered in my head. I could picture him sitting somewhere in that new condo phone in hand, his face pale in the blue light. I set the phone face down on the counter. It buzzed again almost immediately. I turned it over. This time the number was unfamiliar. A local area code, but no name attached. We were at a table near you tonight. We saw what happened. I do not know you, but I thought you should hear this. How you stood there and spoke for yourself was something to see. You reminded us that some things are worth not staying quiet about. I stared at the lines until they blurred. Then I took a slow breath and brought the phone with me down the short hallway to the bathroom. The mirror over the sink was small and speckled with old marks that never quite went away. The light above it buzzed for a second before settling. My face in the glass looked older than it had this morning. Red around the eyes, lines deeper at the corners. There was a faint smudge of mascara just under one eye that I had missed. I turned on the cold tap and cupped my hands under it. The water stung my palms. I splashed it on my face, wiped away the salt and the streak of makeup. Droplets clung to my lashes. For a moment, I rested my hands on the edge of the sink. "I know where I live," I said quietly to my reflection. "That is enough tonight." The woman in the mirror did not look transformed. She just looked like someone who had finally stopped bending. Back in the kitchen, the apartment felt a little different. Nothing had moved. The same chair sat pushed in at the small table. The same dish sat in the sink. My coat was still on the floor by the door, yet something in the air had shifted. I picked up my coat and hung it on the hook, then went to the cupboard and took out a glass. It was one of the cheap ones from a grocery store, set thick and slightly cloudy. I filled it with water from the tap. The stream ran clear, then turned colder. I let it flow for a second, listening to the rush and splash, then shut it off. I carried the glass to the table and sat down. The chair creaked a little under my weight. The heater hissed. Somewhere nearby, a car drove past, music thumping low through the walls. I set the phone beside the glass screen dark and did not touch it. The fridge hummed behind me, steady and familiar. Lily's drawing rustled softly when a draft from the window brushed it. I picked up the glass and took a long drink. The water was plain and clean. It went down cool and settled warm. I set the glass back down and watched the small circle of moisture form on the scarred surface of the table. When I turned off the lights a little while later, the apartment sank into shadow. Streetlight from the alley stretched a narrow stripe across the floor. I walked through it on the way to my bedroom. The bed was made blanket smoothed by habit. I sat on the edge and toed off my shoes, then lay back and stared at the ceiling. Voices from the game downstairs rose and faded. Pipes clicked in the walls. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice, then went quiet. In the dim, my eyes found the faint outline of the crack above the window, the one I had been meaning to get fixed, and traced it. I did not know what my life would look like with the edges rearranged. For the first time in a long time, that thought did not scare me. I pulled the blanket up, closed my eyes, and listened to the sounds of my own small place holding steady around me. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.